You undoubtedly believe you have total control over your ideas and judgments, but how frequently do other factors influence them? You may not even be aware of 21 cognitive thought traps, fallacies, biases, and other phenomena in your brain. Oddities that are ingrained in the human psyche. You may carry these mental shortcuts and thinking errors that affect your daily thinking your entire life or even into adulthood. You cannot turn them off or erase them from your mind. Still, one of the first stages to developing into a more deliberate and logical thinker is to be among the select few who can identify when they enter your thoughts and recognize the circumstances in which they are likely to influence your choices. The remarkable book Thinking Fast and Slow by Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman is the primary source of inspiration for this two-part series. Survivorship bias. In the latter stages of World War II, Navy researchers examined the damage that enemy fire had caused to aircraft that had returned from combat. They concluded that the regions that had sustained the most damage needed to have armor increased to them. We need to place more armor where the planes are getting hit, most seems the most sensible action. Nevertheless, a mathematician named Abraham Wald quickly pointed out a mistake the researchers had made. The only aircraft data they were examining came from those that had completed their missions successfully. The downed bombers were not considered. Wald suggested that they reverse their initial course of action and arm the places where the other bomber planes had not been struck, because in reality it was these locations that were fatally damaging the other bomber planes that had not survived. A logical fallacy known as survivorship bias occurs when the data we are given only represents a portion of the population that has already made it through some filtering procedure. Put more simply, we tend to pay attention to items that made it through a process and ignore those that didn't. 99% of the buildings from that era are probably weak and ugly, but they are completely invisible to us now. People may say, they made much stronger and more beautiful buildings in this time and age, ignoring that this is one of the only buildings to have survived so long. Here's an additional illustration. One relocates to a new town. Observing numerous prosperous eateries nearby, you deduce that if they're all succeeding, there's a good chance you could also. You cannot see the list of all the eateries that closed down years ago. Survivorship bias makes you overestimate your odds of success and underestimate the task when you are simply paying attention to the winners. There are successful performers and actresses everywhere you turn. In actuality, your chances of achievement are just slightly higher than zero. However, the graveyard of all your failures is mostly hidden because nobody finds interest in them all. The media and society exclusively highlight the winners. Look up actors that never made it on Google, or those who failed in life after leaving college. It's unlikely that you'll find anything helpful. There are thousands of people in the cemetery of failure who never made it. There are thousands of unsuccessful enterprises for every successful rock star. Everyone should pursue their goals but resist the urge to underestimate how easy the task will be if you are susceptible to survivorship bias. Watch out for too many positive beliefs that stem from unnoticed failures. Are you concentrating just on the entity or individual that made it through the process? Self-serving bias. You worked hard and got an A on the test, but because the teacher is unjust and doesn't like you, you failed an exam. For the CEO, the company's successes during that year were directly attributable to their wise choices. If the business has a difficult year, government policies, interest rates, and the state of the economy are all at fault. The self-serving bias holds that while our accomplishments are the outcome of our efforts, our setbacks are caused by outside factors. Most people's default response to a bad event is to assign blame and come up with an explanation. The first step in overcoming this is to acknowledge your prejudice. Then, try to be humble and constantly ask for accountability and input from others about your strengths and shortcomings. Self-serving bias is closely associated with the fundamental attribution error. We tend to criticize people based on their character or personality traits, yet we blame external circumstances for our actions. Simon is lazy and doesn't take his work seriously, which is why he is late for work. It's the fault of the weather and traffic if you arrive at work late. When you find yourself making personality judgments about other people, try to check yourself before you assign blame to outside forces. Bias in hindsight. You have undoubtedly come across individuals who are always stating things like, I knew that was going to happen, I knew that stock was going to fall, or I knew she was going to lose the election. I had a feeling Jack and Mary would split up. They are usually the authorities after the fact. This is the "I told you so" phenomenon called hindsight bias. When we examine historical events, everything appears obvious and predetermined. Assume that you are a computer infected with the hindsight bias virus, which makes you erase knowledge from the past. You can never again rebuild past states of knowledge due to this virus. Although we believe our memories are clear, we have trouble recalling certain historical events. One distortion of memory is the hindsight bias. Recollections of your genuine words or beliefs before the incident are warped to align your previous viewpoints with the actual events. Here's an illustration. You genuinely thought this before an election. Your mind is updated with the outcomes you saw. Once the virus starts working, the memory has been altered when you revisit it. Furthermore, you always benefit from memory distortion. As a result, people start to recall things incorrectly, hold on to outdated beliefs, and become overconfident in their ability to explain everything that happened. On the ground, the events leading up to World War II most likely looked like this at the time, but in retrospect, everything was neatly organized into a series of events people should have known was coming. Decision makers, physicians, coaches, CEOs, and financial advisors are particularly vulnerable to the negative effects of hindsight bias because observers tend to evaluate these professionals based more on the success or failure of their choices than on the quality of their judgment. We place the blame for a poor outcome on sound decision making. However, we applaud poor decision making when it produces positive outcomes. It is simple for us to place blame when we have complete knowledge of the events that occurred, but we tend to oversimplify the past when doubt, uncertainty, or complexity existed. Don't worry, Mel, although it appears clear today, it was only a mistake in retrospect. This precise event was going to happen. You could not have known beforehand, are you sure? Humans are notoriously poor at thinking statistically, even when educated. I remember you saying something quite different about availability bias. Cape Town is safe. I know a guy who lives there and has never had any problems with crime. Smoking isn't so bad. My uncle has smoked for 50 years and he is still alive. We use the instances that most readily come to us to paint a picture of the world. Of course, this is irrational and out of touch with reality. These kinds of claims are used to attempt to establish. However, they are completely unproven. This kind of speech makes us vulnerable to availability bias. Safe flights are difficult to remember, while plane crashes on the news are simple to recall. We may develop an unreasonable fear of flying due to the availability bias. It's easy to remember the news story from last week about the shark attack. Safe ocean swims are difficult to remember. Your unwarranted fear of a shark attack may have originated from the availability bias. We use the data that is easiest to recall to assess the chance of something happening. All of the information is available here. The most readily available information is shown here. It may be something we have recently seen, something from the news, or anything extraordinary. Here's an example. In Australia, the odds of being attacked by a shark are approximately 1 in a million, and let's say you believe there is a chance it will occur. You come across a news article about a shark attack that occurred in an unidentified location in Australia. You come upon an account of a shark attack that occurred in your home state. A cousin's acquaintance informs you that a shark attacked his uncle last week. Yesterday, a shark attacked a member of your family. Your perception of risk increases with proximity to the accessible information. Although the facts and reality have not changed, our decision-making process is altered by most of the information at our disposal. Because of availability bias, we carry an erroneous mental risk map throughout life. We overestimate the likelihood of dying from disease or diabetes, and we underestimate the likelihood of an automobile accident, terrorist strike, or airline catastrophe. A local news article about a razor blade discovered in candy causes mothers in the community to worry. This worry is then reported nationally, which causes parents to panic and check their children's candy. Eventually, homemade cakes and candy are not distributed to trick-or-treaters nationwide. This is known as the availability cascade. This is an availability cascade, a self-sustaining series of events that could begin with media coverage of a relatively small incident and escalate to widespread public fear and extensive government action. People start to accept the concept because it's common, not because it's true or widely held. In simpler terms, an availability cascade can be defined as a massive overreaction to a little issue. When faced with small risks, we tend to overestimate or dismiss them entirely, with no middle ground. This experience of waiting late at night for their adolescent child to get home may be familiar to parents. They know that the likelihood of everything continuing as usual is 99%. However, even the slightest suspicion that something might be amiss starts a self-sustaining chain of events that spirals out of control and results in more and more worries about a terrible event having occurred. This can ultimately cause panic and the need to call someone immediately to ensure their child is okay. Is what you see on the news just a cascade of availability, or is it an unbiased piece of journalism? Sunk cost fallacy. You and your friend go to the movies, and after 25 minutes you both realize the movie is terrible. This is just an availability cascade, a non-event that is being inflated by the media until it fills our screens and there is public outcry. This is known as the sunk cost fallacy. You turn to your friend and say, "This is terrible, let's get out of here." He responds, "Yeah, it is, but we spent a lot on these tickets, we can't just leave now." You will have spent the money whether you decide to stay or leave. Another example. Let's say you have a partner who cheats on you frequently, yet you still choose to accept her back. If you hear yourself saying this, you might think, "I can't give up on this woman now. I've invested so much time, energy, and love into her. I'm so proud of myself." Or, when the stock price declines, one may say, "I spent so much on this stock, I can't sell it now." Most likely you are running into the sunk cost fallacy. When making decisions in the stock market, investors are particularly susceptible to the sunk cost fallacy. To be more reasonable, consider the stock's current situation and prospects rather than emphasizing prior financial, time, energy, or romantic commitments. The framing effect. Which meat are you interested in purchasing? Even though options A and B are identical, most individuals choose option A when given the choice. 99% fat-free or 1% fat. Now would be a good time. Is there 1% fat or 98% fat-free? Most individuals still choose option A. This is known as the framing effect. Depending on how information is presented, we frequently derive different inferences from it. Keep an eye out for how various news sources present their stories and headlines and how businesses present their offers. A small popcorn costs $3, while a large amount costs $7. Which one would you pick? In this instance, a larger proportion is likelier to choose the less expensive option. Allow me to present a third choice now. A medium size costs $6.50. Research indicates that a significantly greater proportion of those presented with these three options will select the large, perceiving it as the best value. The decoy modifies your impression and sways your decision in favor of the more costly alternative, even though the tiny and large prices are precisely the same. The readers of The Economist magazine were not pleased with the outcomes when they were presented with these two possibilities. Most chose the less expensive choice. The offer was the same, but the print and web offers now looked far more lucrative. When they added a third decoy option, their sales shot up by 43%. The bills have to be paid. Would you mind paying the bills, honey? Not what you say matters, but rather how you say it. Which would you prefer, cash or credit card payment? People wouldn't feel as guilty about passing up the discount to easily use their credit card if the sign indicated a 5% cash discount. People would more likely avoid the charge if the sign indicated a 5% credit card surcharge. However, upon closer examination, they are identical. You have a 90% chance of making it through this procedure. 10% of people will not recover from this surgery. Same result, distinct frames. The feelings we experience when making particular decisions are influenced by the language we employ. Illusion of clustering. Have you ever noticed faces in the clouds, faces on Mars rock formations, or Jesus on toast? The human brain looks for guidelines and patterns. The clustering illusion is generally harmless, but there are some practical ramifications. Investors who use technical chart analysis are adept at seeing trends and making forecasts from the data. They frequently recognize trends and take up risky investments in areas where none have ever been. Look at this series of X's and O's for a bit. Is the order predetermined or random? When asked to explain the pattern of letters, people frequently devise various laws or principles even though the letters are random. Regaining your skepticism will help you get over your susceptibility to pattern identification. If you notice a pattern, consider whether you are more likely to be fooled by the clustering illusion than by random chance. Exponential growth. Imagine folding a sheet of paper half a dozen times, then again, and so on. What would the thickness be after 50 folds? Because the paper would be so thick, your prediction of a few inches thick would be a little off. From Earth, it could almost reach the sun. To us, linear progress makes sense. We cannot, however, understand exponential expansion. So why is that the case? To put it simply, it wasn't required previously. The majority of our predecessors' experiences were linear. Let's use some examples of fictitious growth in this imaginary nation. This nation has a 5% inflation rate. If we're being sincere, we have no notion of what that implies, even intuitively. Only 5%, others might say, that's not too awful. On the other hand, if I were to tell you that in 14 years your money would only be worth half of what it is now, you could take that news with little thinking. Furthermore, it can potentially cause you concern. The most potent force in the universe is compounding, said Albert Einstein. The greatest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand the exponential function. To demonstrate the power of exponential growth, imagine we place 1 rice grain on the first square of this chessboard, 2 on the second, 4 on the third, and so on, doubling the number of grains on each successive square. For this task, how many grains of rice would we need? Exponential growth isn't all that remarkable in the short term, but over the long run it grows swiftly and can easily reach astronomical and incomprehensible proportions. We can't comprehend, yet the task would require 18 quintillion rice grains to finish. This shows how quickly a small amount of something can increase when it is subject to the power of exponential growth. Use the rule of 70 to estimate how long it would take for any process to double, or find a more obvious way to explain anything. 10% returns on investing means that after about 7 years, your money will be worth twice as much. In around 8.7 years, your money will be worth half what it is now due to 8% inflation. A nation experiencing 5% population growth will double in around 14 years. Although the world is full of uncertainties and complications, and these growth rates would need to remain constant, these are far more intuitive than stating that the current inflation rate is X%. Use caution when dealing with exponential growth. We don't have any intuition regarding exponential growth, so never trust it. Whenever feasible, attempt to transform the growth rate into a linear quantity with a specified duration. Barnum effect. It could surprise you, the spectator, that I know you. You are highly dependent on the approval and admiration of others. You take great satisfaction in your ability to think for yourself, yet occasionally you have severe questions about whether you made the proper choice. You exhibit extroversion, friendliness, and sociability at times, as well as introversion, caution, and reserve. Did I come close to capturing the essence of your personality? In 1948, Bertram Forer conducted an experiment in which participants were given identical generalized statements from astrological magazines. Subsequently, he informed everyone that he had written the statement for them. 86% of respondents said the text accurately reflected their personality. This is known as the Barnum effect, wherein we readily attach our personalities to nebulous and generalized assertions, even when they apply to a broad spectrum of individuals. The next time you say, "OMG, that is so me," after reading your horoscope or taking an online quiz to determine what kind of spirit animal you are, keep in mind that the Barnum effect makes people easily duped by horoscopes, palm readings, and psychics.